Hello and welcome to the Halloween episode of the magical world of G. Michael Vasey. And today we have a wonderful conversation lined up with the Paranormal Pastor, Ezekiel Kincaid. This is one of those episodes when you should listen all the way through to the end because it's full of surprises, and we cover things like the nature of evil, exorcism, and what is a demon. Here he is, the Paranormal Pastor.
So I was in full-time ministry for about 20 years. I was an ordained Baptist minister, and I left full-time ministry in about 2014 and started writing horror in about the end of 2017, 2018. And currently I work as a chaplain for one of the hospitals here in Louisiana in the States.
How does a chaplain slash pastor slash whatever get interested in writing horror?
Well, I grew up as a lifelong horror fan. I guess it started around the age of 6. I saw my first movie on demon possession that scared the daylights out of me. It was a made for TV movie called The Demon Murder Case with Kevin Bacon.
Uh-huh.
And it was based on one of Ed and Lorraine Warren's case files.
Yeah.
That's kind of the same case file that the new Conjuring movie, The Devil Made Me Do It, was based off of.
Yeah. I'm familiar with the movie actually. Go on.
Yeah, and it scared the daylights out of me as a 6 or 7 year old child. And ever since then, I was hooked on scary movies. And so it's always been a huge part of me and things that I've enjoyed. And I started reading more horror literature when I was in high school, of course, horror comics and things like that. But I started making the connection while I was in full-time ministry, probably around 2012 is when I started noticing a lot of the connections between really ministry and horror writing. In ministry, I was able to be with people in some really hard places and got to see the lowest lows, and you got to see the best of the human condition and the worst. And
Yeah.
also in ministry, you're dealing with the supernatural, and all of that plays into horror as well. And so I started bridging the two, and I just kind of went out on a limb then in 2017 and decided I was going to start trying my hand at moving away from writing theology and philosophy, which I still do some of that on the side, but really starting to focus on fiction writing. And it just kind of just went from there and took off.
So when you approach fiction, horror fiction, do you base it on personal experience or do you just make it up?
A little bit of both. I think I've seen enough in my years of ministry that I have situations and things that I can draw upon to help influence my characters, to make them very realistic. Also things to draw upon emotions and situations. So there's a little bit of both in it for me.
Right. In terms of your exposure to the supernatural,
Yes.
and I'm sat here, obviously kind of thinking like the sort of Exorcist movies, that kind of thing, which I'm sure it wasn't like that at all. But being a minister and being exposed to the paranormal, what form did that take?
It's taken several forms. Some of the most memorable experiences I've had was back in, I believe it was 2003 or 2004, I had my first encounter with a demon possessed lady and had to cast the demon out of a lady. That was the only time that I've ever experienced that in my life. It was it was intense, but obviously it's not like the movies portray it. But there definitely were some similarities. One of the things being is this lady would go lock herself in a closet, and she would black out and not know where she was for a while. Of course, all this is coming from the information that the husband was giving me before we did the exorcism. And she would sit in the closet and rock and bang on the closet, and he would hear her speaking in multiple different languages. And then she would have no recollection of what she was doing whenever she would come to.
Right.
The exorcism, he had to hold her down, but we were able to cast the demon out of the lady, and she was able to find freedom. But it was definitely a very intense situation. There was also a time where I was doing a paranormal investigation while I was in college at an abandoned World War II ice house here in Louisiana, and me and my friends had gone out at about 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning, and actually went out there and stumbled upon some of the cult members and ended up getting shot at while we were out there. And we were able to get away, but that was definitely a memorable and scary experience.
Can you imagine? I think
And
more
then,
scary would be being shot at.
what's that?
I think more scary would be being shot at.
Yeah, absolutely. But we still ended up going back out there. um, and then another memorable one was just several months ago. I went to Fort Duffield, Kentucky, with my fiance and a guy named Dustin from Professional Paranormal Research, and we went to a haunted cemetery there, the Cursed Cemetery there in the town, and we had a lot of paranormal activity, EVPs. We had some photographs where we were able to capture some things as well, motion detectors going off, spirits making a ball light up. So a lot of cool things happened on that. So those have been some of my most memorable paranormal supernatural experiences.
It doesn't sound like you're very scared.
No, you get to doing this for a while, and you, not that you build up a resistance to it, but you understand that fear and negative energy has no place. And it actually, if you're dealing with negative entities such as demons, they feed off of that fear.
Yeah.
And in my personal faith and belief system, as a Christian and as a minister, I believe that Jesus Christ has defeated these spiritual forces and has power over them, and that he protects me. And so when I do engage, I come with the attitude that I'm protected, that the victory is already given, and not that I approach it flippantly. I mean, you still come at this with a respect and a reverence with what you're dealing with. But as far as a terrifying, disabling fear, that is, I guess, in my personal belief system, is not there, just because of my understanding of my personal faith.
Yeah, I would concur with that entirely. I think fear is giving them energy, and you need not to be afraid. But I must confess, I've never tried to get an EVP, nor would I, because when I've sort of watched a TV program or heard on a podcast or something, an EVP, that really does turn my stomach a little bit.
Yeah.
That scares me a little bit. So I try to stay away from stuff like that.
Oh, understandable.
We're going to talk about your book, obviously, but I just my latest with the guys that I think published yours as well. It's called Liminal People, and I put forward a theory based on many years of personal experience collecting stories, and I come from a more of a magical realm in terms of background. So I came to this conclusion that, well, just to sort of look at it as almost like twisting a radio dial and
Yeah.
tuning it to different frequencies. And there are frequencies below us and above us that we normally have no access to. We live in a parallel universe with all of these other parallel universes on different frequencies. And I think that some of the entities that live in some of these parallel frequencies are very aware of our existence. I think some
Yes.
of those below us on the frequency scale recognize us as potentially providing them with substance. And they get that sustenance in the form of either fear or sexual or some other sort of negatively used energy, shall we say. And then
Yes.
above us on the radio dial are much more positive and friendly entities, usually, that often crop up as the third man in the emergency situation. You know, the person that appears, gives aid, and then disappears strangely. Or if they're really high on the dial, they can appear as angels and that kind of entity. Would you agree with that kind of analysis? Is that really
Yeah, I
reasonable?
actually like that analogy. Very
Yeah.
much so.
And I think
Very
the,
much.
the guys down below us definitely feed off of the energy. So when I was growing up, I was exposed to poltergeist and some paranormal activity as a teen, and this really scared me. In fact, it was. You may not approve of this. I don't know, being a Christian, but doing a course of hermetic magic
Mhm.
basically built the spine in me, and I realized that my fear was what was attracting these things, and
Right.
that I described it in one book that I wrote early on. I imagine that I was lit up like a Christmas tree on their side of reality,
Mhm.
and a willing victim. All they had to do was show up and go boo in my ear, and I was freaking out and soaking them with just exactly what they were looking for. And so when I sort of did the sort of know yourself and tried to understand who I was and where I was coming from and what made me tick and how I related to the bigger picture, I suddenly started to realize that in fact you need to have faith. You need to be strong. You need to have faith that you are protected by God or whatever entity
Mhm.
you believe in. And once you and never give in to the fear. And so that's people often ask me. I use the title sometimes Master of the Paranormal, and people ask me, how on earth can you do it, Gary? How can you write all these books about ghosts and black-eyed kids and demons and stuff? And I say, well, it's just basically a hobby, and I don't let it frighten me. I don't let it interfere with my day-to-day life. And I
Right.
assume that's the way you approach it as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It is something, that I do on the side. I guess maybe it sounds weird to say that we do it for fun. I mean, it's we are. I mean, it's interesting to us. We have this whole parallel world and universe that we don't really know too much about, and that we're kind of
Yeah,
groping through, and all of us are here trying to figure out what exactly
yeah.
is going on, and we learn some things along the way from each other as we do this. But yeah, getting back to what you were talking about, fear, that fear is such a life source for these negative entities to feed off of. And when I go with people on some of these investigations, or when I was doing this exorcism with the lady and her husband, that was one of the things I had to sit down and talk with him about is, don't be afraid. No matter what you see, no matter what happens,
Mhm.
they're going to feed off of that fear. and that negative energy. It's just like, it's like blood in the water for a shark. But yeah, I like your analogy with the radio dial and the frequencies, because we are kind of tuning in, and different places that we go and different experiences and encounters that we have. Some of these entities are good and benevolent. One of the places I went to in Fort Duffield with a cursed cemetery, there was a ghost of some children that were very good and benevolent. But then I've been to some places in the past where you definitely sense there is something sinister. And you see people also that I've had to do a cleansing on, where they go around and they open doors to stuff and mess with things just for fun. They don't really know what they're doing. And something gets attached to them, and, they're coming to me, Zeke, help us. We messed around with this, and now we're seeing this. So-and-so woke up in the middle of the night, just spouting out Latin. She's never spoken Latin before. We should have never messed with this. And, so the paranormal is not something you jump into blindly, also because you need to know what you're doing, because you don't know what you're opening a door to.
No.
At times. And you have, I think you might agree with me with this. You have demon spirits called familiar spirits who can pretend to be good ghosts just so that they can kind of creep their way in. And
to some extent, I often think about it as it's a bit like humans, really. It's, you tend to, well, at least I do. I tend to move through life kind of innocently and naively, believing everybody's basically a nice person.
Yeah.
And then you realize that, in fact, that's not quite correct. There are basically parasitic people out there that live off of fear and control and manipulation, and give them half a chance that they will do something to damage you or frighten you or control you. And so why would the rest of reality be any different, right?
Yeah.
So I see it kind of that way. Now, doing an exorcism is something I would never attempt to do. And I can't even imagine what kind of preparation work you would require to do it. But I mean, what did that involve?
For me personally, it involved a week long of prayer and fasting and meditation and scripture reading, and just really preparing my heart and mind, having the people who were involved kind of do the same thing, because you don't know what it's going to be like. You don't know what you're stepping into. There's so much unknown when you go deal with something like
that's
this.
where the fear is, isn't it? It's in the unknown. It's in the not knowing what to expect. It's the shock, fear of something totally unexpected, like in one of the movies where a head spins around. Something like that is so shocking and unexpected, it destroys the concentration, and it creates, you can fall back into fear, and then you're done for.
Yeah.
So I guess, really got to prepare. That's why I'd never ever attempt such thing. I'd always defer to someone else. And do you approach, you say you do investigation work as well. Do you approach investigation work with the same degree of care or less so?
No, the same degree. I mean, obviously, I don't go to the extent of fasting and praying unless I know for a fact that there's been some, very negative energy and negative spirits in a place. I might go to that extreme, but definitely when we are there and finishing up, there's definitely a cleansing that we do, and telling spirits that they cannot come with us, they cannot attach themselves to us or to any of the equipment or any of the things that we've used or any of the people there. So a cleansing when we're done, prayers of protection when we go in, though you're not afraid, you're reverent, if that makes sense. You treat it with respect and awe because
Absolutely.
it is power greater than you. It is something that is a lot of unknown. And so you have to go at it with a great degree of humility.
How often do you actually do paranormal type investigative work?
The last one I did was in August. I think we're trying to plan some more back up in Kentucky, Tennessee area, probably for this coming March. So it's just as often as I can get away and plan those trips.
How has all this translated into writing? What have you written? Tell us about what you've written and give us a bit of a plot. And let's talk about the book.
Okay. So the stuff that I have out with Raventail currently is the Dreadful Death series.
Yeah.
It is a historical possession slash supernatural slash creature series. It takes place in the early 1800s about a young girl named Theodosia, and her father Charles is a professor of ancient religions at UNC Chapel Hill, and he is exploring these ancient documents about an entity called the Tetramet. And unbeknownst to him, as he is studying this document, this entity is pursuing his daughter Theodosia.
Right.
And so it is a tale that is kind of part exorcist, part Carrie. There's some creatures in there that's a little bit kind of Pan's Labyrinth. And it follows Theodosia's descent into the darkness. She has a guardian demon named Hophni who is kind of preparing her for the Tetramet and leading her and guiding her. And so each book peels back more and more of the layers of this young girl's plight, and it deals with
She
things
has a
such as
guardian demon, did you say?
a guardian demon. Yes, instead of a guardian angel, she has a guardian demon
Oh, wow.
to make sure that she fulfills her malevolent destiny, so to speak.
Right. And how many books in the series will there be?
There's 3 books. The second one is getting ready to drop soon. I don't have a release date yet, but it has just gotten out of editing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure we'll get a release date on that soon. The first one is out. It's called The Dawning.
And how did it do? How's it doing?
It did pretty well. People, based on the reviews and things that people were saying, it's one of the most terrifying books they've ever read.
Interesting.
As a horror writer is what you want to hear. And
Yeah.
I'm telling them, y'all, this is just the first book in the series. Like, it gets worse. So hold tight. So if they're, it's good to hear that they're already getting scared with the first book. And I'm like, man, 2 and 3 are a lot worse than the first one. So you're in for a ride.
In terms of developing this idea, again, I'm intrigued as to what prompted the concept. Was it, you said it was partly real and partly imagination, but was there some particular event that sort of just prompted this concept, or was that just your imagination?
Well, the book started writing it in 2018, 2019, and it was meant to be more of a horror fantasy about this little girl who has these mind powers, and she can cross in and out of the ethereal plane, kind of basing it on H.P. Lovecraft. And she builds these relationships with these different gods and monsters. So it was kind of to take more of a fantasy route.
Yeah.
And as I was writing the book, and as I was getting ready to wrap up the ending, I don't know if it was a vision or a dream. a lot of people I tell this story to, they say they think it sounds like more of a vision than it was a dream. But I remember kind of half asleep, half awake in my bed, and I roll over and I look, and I see a little redheaded girl standing there. And I immediately knew it was the girl from my book, Theodosia.
Right.
And she looks at me and she says, "The way that you are writing my story is not how it happened." She reaches out her hand and she says, "Take my hand and I'm going to show you how I really died and how everything went down with the children." And so I reached out and grabbed her hand. And then the next thing I know, I'm standing in the farmhouse from the book. And she takes me around the house to each room and she starts telling me the ending of the book.
Yeah.
She says, "You need to go back and rewrite it all." And she said that the whole thing needs to be scratched. And then I kind of come to, and I'm still sitting at my bed and the little girl is gone. And then every time I sat down to write the book, she was there. She would appear and she would almost in a way kind of dictate what to write. So I went back, and this whole series that is out now, the Dreadful Death series, is nothing like it was as I originally intended it. It is now this terrifying tale of possession, when my intent of the book was it was supposed to be more kind of a fun horror fantasy. And it is not fun. It's not light reading. If you don't like being scared, don't read the book, because it is very
Well,
intense.
I got to tell you something. That sounds, the way you just described that sounds to me like what I would describe to be a magical experience, where essentially some entity contacted you and is working through you. Now, that when I say some entity, don't panic, because the entity, it could be a part of you, right? It can be a part of you. It doesn't have to be an external entity. But it almost sounds like the concept of sort of spirit writing. You know,
Mm-hmm.
is there a chance that, given that you had and probably still have a ministry, is there any chance that somehow this plays into that, or would you see it that way potentially?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I've seen her. I haven't seen her since the book has been released and published. It was almost kind of like once she had her story told,
Yeah.
she was good to go. But it was one of these things where she was telling me, "You have to let people know my story. You have to let them know about what the darkness did to me." And as the appearances went on, like, I would try to ask her things and she wouldn't really give too much information. It was only like she would only tell me what she wanted me to know. And other questions I asked, she just would not answer at all. But towards the end, it became clear to me that this little girl, because sometimes she would appear very sweet and innocent, and then sometimes she would appear very evil and malevolent, like in the book as well. She definitely takes on that ideology. And towards the end, it became clear to me that the spirit of this young girl was being tormented by some negative spirits. In the end, the best that I could do was just bless her and pray for her to be released from those things, and for her to try to help her move on. And since the book was published, I have not seen or heard from her.
So yeah, it's
So
almost mediumistic in a sense, and it's interesting how you describe in that way how your concept for the book basically was taken out of your control and completely changed.
yeah.
And I've definitely experienced that, not quite in the same way. The first time I tried to write a novel, or a novella because it wasn't long enough to be a novel. I had thought and thought and thought about this story of basically the nature of reality, the idea of ritual magic and quantum
Mm-hmm.
physics, right?
Oh, interesting.
And so I wanted to kind of show that what is really called magic is nothing more than operating at the quantum level, that quantum
Right.
physicists, the old alchemists, were basically talking exactly the same language, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was what I set out to write, but halfway through this book just took off on its own, and I had no idea where it was going. And the ending was so bizarre and such a complete surprise that I just couldn't begin to imagine how this had happened. And I think sometimes that writing, that creative process, just kind of takes over in one way or another, doesn't it? And
Yes,
before
it
you know it,
does.
you're in virgin territory that you'd never imagined, going somewhere where you don't know where you're going.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Given that you wrote something so dark apparently and so scary, I'm going to ask, how do you reconcile that with Christianity?
Well, there's a lot in the Psalms about God being light in the darkness, and the dark is light to him. And he has, in the book of Genesis, we see he created both the light and the dark.
Yeah,
And I am a big believer too, in the sense that if we don't understand evil, we don't understand good. If we don't
yeah,
understand good, we don't understand evil. These things
yeah,
go hand in hand. And you see in the Old Testament and a lot of the New Testament, it's the light versus the dark. That's a huge theme in the scriptures. And so for me, it's very easy to reconcile those two worlds, because we're in that constant battle of light versus darkness, even in this world, in the acts of humanity. I mean,
hmm,
we're called to do good and to not harm and to not put evil on other people or to cause other people harm.
yeah,
And so there's always this triumph, as humans, as people created in the image of God, to reflect him, to seek after justice, to seek after righteousness, to seek after the embetterment of humanity. And to do that, you have to come face to face with the darkness. You can't ignore it and act like it does not exist.
yeah, absolutely. The mantra, obviously, in my part of the world is "Know thyself, as above, so below." So
Yes.
if you don't know the darkness within yourself, if you don't know who you are, then you can't operate as a full and complete person because you don't know who you are. You don't know what you're doing. And it also reminds me, in my younger days, I went through Methodism, Anglican Church, Catholic Church. I experimented quite a bit, and along the way, I sort of got this impression that sometimes I almost felt like in some forms of Christianity, it's almost as if they have two gods. They have God and Satan, because they don't seem to equate one with the other. Whereas for me, my mind would tell me, well, hang on, if God created everything, surely he created Satan, so Satan's an aspect of God.
Mm-hmm.
So I worship one God, not two. And the dark and the light are both reflected within that one God, because what the other side of that is sometimes I think, what we think of as evil isn't necessarily so. It may be for the greater good, but it may have a negative consequence on us. But
Yeah.
that negative consequence can also be a learning experience from which good comes.
Yes.
So it's not quite as simple, is it? As sometimes they'd have you believe. I don't think anyway.
No, no, it is not. And that's one of the things the book deals with, is God and the problem of evil.
Yeah,
So that is definitely a good point that you bring up, and my characters wrestle with that.
I was watching a YouTube video just this morning with Stephen Fry. I don't know if you know Stephen Fry, but he's a British guy. He's very bright, very intellectual, very well known, and very well thought of by Brits in general. Does lots of TV work and programs and writes lots of books and things. He was in a conversation and he was saying, he's an atheist, and if he could just have a word with God, he'd basically, pull him apart. And I thought, well, but for someone so bright, what is it you don't get? Yeah, it's not nice that there's evil in the world. It's not nice that there's suffering in the world. But without the evil, without the suffering, how would you know? How would you know anything? I mean, how do I know that fire burns without being burned? How do I experience peace without knowing not being at peace? How do I experience happiness if I've never been sad?
Yeah.
So it's all about it's not as simple as black and white, good and evil. It's all a big playground in essence, where I think our what we're trying to do is learn, is assimilate our humanity and become essentially what we were promised to be, which is created in the likeness and image of God.
Yeah.
So we can't do that unless we experience everything, and therefore there has to be evil and there has to be suffering. Otherwise, how could we experience the things we need to experience? I mean, it's very easy for me to sit in my desk, surrounded by pretty much luxury, and say that, but I think that's basically philosophically where I come from, anyway.
Yeah. Christianity kind of follows that same mindset. There's a verse that talks about God working all things for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And so he's able to take these seemingly negative events and bring good forth from them. Not that the painful events themselves are, we're going to sit there and be like, oh yeah, this is great that this is happening to me.
Yeah.
But he's able to bring good from them, kind of like those negative things put a seed in the ground, and God is able to water that seed and cause it to grow into something good, that evil and the negative doesn't always have to have the final word.
No, well, in fact, if you look at the monomyth, the hero's journey, which is the seed of all stories, really, then basically you go into the darkness in order to find the light, and that's the basis of all good stories, all good legends and myths, and it's called the monomyth, the hero's journey. I mean, there's a recognized set of steps along the hero's journey as well, but you have to go into the darkness in order to find the light. You have to go into your own darkness in order to find what makes you tick and return with something of value, that can then be offered, as a sort of reward for the fears and ordeals that you've been through. I mean, if you think of any myth or legend, that's basically the whole part of the story. Even the modern comic book stuff that you would have read is basically go into the darkness, confront something, and return with something of value. That's the monomyth. If you think about if with your experience of demonic forces, what do you think a demon actually is?
There's a lot of theories in Christianity. There's three main theories that I have come across. One is the theory that they are fallen angels.
Yeah.
The other is that they are the souls of the Nephilim, who were the giants of old, who were birthed from the sons of God coming down and procreating with the daughters of men. And then those giants who got wiped out in the flood, it's supposedly their spirits that were disembodied. That belief was made big by the book of Enoch, and was the main belief in the day of Jesus. And then you have another belief in Christianity that's not really talked about too much because it never really caught on, but it was the belief that demon spirits were just the souls of the wicked dead, like people who were really, really evil in
Hmm.
this life, that they got trapped here, and they kind of just lingered here, and they're here to cause personal torment. My theory is I don't know. I'm not sure what they really are,
Yeah.
because I am also a man of science as well. So I hold to evolutionary theory and everything like that. And so when I look at the book of Genesis, not that I'm like, oh well, I'm going to let science determine my interpretation of this book, but it definitely needs to inform it. But looking at the book of Genesis, and especially its historical context in the ancient Near East that it was written in, I think a lot of that is just mythological language, and it's kind of mythical language to maybe explain some type of historical event in a theological way. So, did the sons of God actually come down and procreate with women and give birth to giants? I don't personally think so. Just given the type of language that it is. So, are these demon spirits the disembodied spirits of giants? I don't think they are, but I'm open to being wrong. What I do know is that these things, whatever their origin is, whether they're spirits of the wicked dead, whether they are fallen angels, or whether they are disembodied spirits of this ancient race, that they are very malevolent. They are destructive. They are chaotic, and their only purpose in their existence is to cause harm and destruction.
Interesting. I guess I still think that it's like a set of frequencies, and they represent a low frequency that is below us. And I think there's a degree of envy of the fact that we are ostensibly created in the image of the Maker and also have free will.
Yeah.
And I think that's that they're like the equivalent of the angels, but on the other end of the spectrum, I guess is the way I tend to look at it. I'm fascinated by the stories of the Nephilim and the Book of Enoch, but I tend to look at that more, and I tend to look at the archaeological record. I'm a geologist, by the way. I look at the archaeological record with increasing disbelief that we didn't have the technology to build the pyramid. We didn't have technology to build some of these 11,000-year-old structures in that particular time. In fact, we might not even have the technology to do it now. So I have a funny feeling that man's been around a lot longer than archaeology will allow at this point in time, and that we've gone through several cycles of civilization and destruction. And I think the story of the Nephilim could well be just a distant memory of an alien race or something like that, interbreeding and producing, some hybrids. And if you read some of the hidden archaeology stuff, it's not so hidden anymore in this day and era, of course, with YouTube and blogs and stuff. There's plenty of evidence for giants in the archaeological record, plenty.
Right.
So it's just ignored by most mainstream archaeologists. And I mean, being a scientist, I also understand how something like that can happen, because I know how science really works, and I know it's like everything else. It's driven by money and prestige and reputation and ego, and people get into positions of power on editorial boards and things to peer review and make sure that certain things don't make it through the peer review process. And so, as they say, science always makes a big move forward when the current sort of leader of the pack dies.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that. So I've come. I think I've come full circle. I mean, I used to be a believer in Darwin and evolution, and I still am. I think it can be a part of the process, but I also now see some intelligence behind everything that's undeniable. And
Oh, absolutely.
it become, the intelligent design isn't something I would necessarily buy hook, line, and sinker either. I think intelligent design can be through evolutionary process, right?
Right.
But then when you look at how evolution occurs, and you look at things like number sequences and Fibonacci series, and if you look at how things are shaped and what the mathematics behind that is, well, either we live in a big computer program, or somebody set this up in the beginning. That can be the only explanation in my mind. Or
Yes.
or we simply create our own. We already are the gods, and we just create our own reality. And I mean, I've often wondered whether, in fact, we each create our own reality, and we kind of live in overlapping parallel realities. And when you get in, this is why I got into quantum physics. Because when you get into
Right.
quantum physics and you start to look at some of that stuff, it's so bizarre that you begin to realize that actually I have no outward experience of anything. I
Yeah.
don't touch anything. I don't see anything. It's all basically internal realizations that I believe to be external. So I've no, I sometimes play with my daughter and say, you know what? Maybe this morning you woke up and you're in a computer game that you just paid a couple of $100,000 to have a day holiday in this place called Earth. And you woke up this morning and you think you've actually lived 15 years, but actually all those memories of the 15 years right up to the moment you were born were just placed there to give you context. When you go to sleep at night, that's the end of it. You've played your computer game, you've paid your money, and now you get back on with your real life. And there's
It's
no way.
possible.
It's possible. It's absolutely possible. And so I say the older I get, the less I know. I used to be kind of, opinionated, and I still am, but in a different way. I'm, less inclined to be black and white, and everything seems much grayer to me these days.
Absolutely. That's what I've noticed in all of this, and the more that I study, the more that I grow, is there's so much gray area, and there's so much we don't know, and we all have to have just this element of humility.
There's so much we think we know that we actually don't. It's just a lie.
Right.
And that's the other disturbing thing, is when you look at history, it's basically a lie. When you look at almost anything, it's basically a lie. It's a narrative that people decide to agree to believe in. And I think that evil really is at work in the world, and I believe that evil is working that narrative, a fear-based narrative, to keep people from understanding and realizing. I wrote a blog article today that the term woke really is a sort of bastardized, misshaped version of awakened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost like, to be woke is basically to be fast asleep and just pushed around by these negative forces that are there to keep you under control. And yet, all the time, even though you're kept under control, all the time there are symbols out there in the real world, that talk about enlightenment and true awakening. And so, because you have free will, they can never take your free will from you. They have to kind of leave a door open for you. But if you make a run for the door, then you can awaken, and you can escape from this sort of servitude. But it's getting harder and harder because of the internet, because of TV, because of social media, because of we've just been through 2.5 years of, I would call, hell on earth, because of some virus supposedly created in a lab somewhere, and who knows what the truth behind any of that is. Honestly, I don't know what the truth is behind any of that. The more you dig into it, it's like you dig into something with an open, critical mind, and it just disappears right in front of you. PCR test. Well, what does a PCR test? Well, if you talk to the creator and if you talk to people who have an open mind, they'll tell you it really doesn't detect a virus at all. So what are we testing for then? And what was it? What is it we were finding? And it just becomes, in the end, it just becomes like, I have no clue what is going on. I just know that I need to have an open mind, accept personal responsibility, because the only person responsible for anything that happens to me is really me.
Yeah,
I have to have faith that there's a purpose and a reason. And at the end of the day, that's all I can do.
absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about, if listeners want to know a little bit more about you, or they want to get their hands on that scary book, how would they do that?
It's on Amazon. You can look up Ezekiel Kincaid, and it'll pull up my author page on Amazon, or you can just look up The Dawning. For people who aren't into the terrifying scary, I have a horror comedy called The Adventures of Johnny Walker Ranger Demon Slayer that is more
Cool.
along the lines of Evil Dead type humor. Johnny Walker Ranger leads a team called the Bruce Campbells to stop a demon apocalypse in Oxford, Mississippi. He's a drunk alcoholic redneck called by God to kill demons, and he lets everybody know it. And
That sounds really fun.
It's over the top and it's violence, and people have kind of described it as it's like the Ready Player One of horror. There's a lot of 80s horror nods, early 90s horror nods to it. It's also like South Park in that it's a social commentary that makes fun of absolutely everything. Like nothing is off limits with Johnny Walker Ranger. So if you're a fan of Evil Dead and that type of humor, sarcastic,
Yeah.
one-liners, non-PC, then people may want to take a look at Johnny Walker Ranger Demon Slayer. The second one is going to be coming out this next year as well, but the Dreadful Death series by Raventell is the one that is the scary one. The Dawning's out now. The Gathering, which is the second part, is due to come out soon.
Do you have a website or anything?
Yes, I have a new website that I just launched. I'm still working on it. It's called the Paranormal Pastor. And so if you just do that, Google that, the Paranormal Pastor, it should pull that up. That's what people have started calling me. It was the Paranormal Pastor, the Pastor of Horror. So I just kind of ran with it. So, and I also write for House of Stitched magazine. We've got an issue dropping here in the next couple days, the Halloween issue, and I do an article for them called The Paranormal Pastor. In this particular Halloween issue, there is an interview that I did with a couple who went through a real life case of demon possession. So it will make your skin crawl.
Well, there you go. Thanks for listening to this special Halloween episode of the Magical World of G. Michael Vasey podcast series. If you enjoyed this, please do share it, like it, and subscribe. That's the way to support this channel. In the meanwhile, my thanks to my guest, my thanks to you for listening, and go out and buy that book. It sounds extremely scary. Just the thing for Halloween. Bye.